Our next episode is called The Wounded. It's episode number 86 of Star Trek TNG. It originally aired on January 28th, 1991. It was written by Jerry Taylor from a story by Stuart Charno, Sarah Charno, and Cy Chermak, and directed by Chip Chalmers. Now the episode begins as the Enterprise lingers at the edge of Cardassian space, waiting to report their presence to a Cardassian scout ship. Now, although the Federation and the Cardassians have a peace treaty, the Cardassians still are zealously guarding their territory. Now, suddenly, a Cardassian scout ship appears and fires on the Enterprise. Now, after trying repeated hails, Picard fires back and damages the ship. When he demands a reason for the attack, Captain Gul Macet replies that it is normal to attack when at war. Picard reminds him of the treaty, but Gul Macet shocks Picard with news of a Federation attack on a research station. So Picard contacts Starfleet, and Starfleet confirms that the USS Phoenix, under the command of Captain Ben Maxwell, did attack the station. Now the Phoenix will not respond to Starfleet's hails, so Starfleet tells Picard to do what is necessary to preserve the peace. Picard invites Gul Macet and his aides aboard the Enterprise and begins a search for the Phoenix. And when they finally locate it, they do it not in the nick of time because Maxwell destroys a Cardassian warship and freighter. Now when Maxwell comes on board the Enterprise, he tries to convince Picard that the Cardassians are amassing for war, and he claims the research stations are simply base camps for a new offensive into Federation space. Picard sends Maxwell back to his ship and orders him to return to Federation space, but shortly afterward the Phoenix veers off course and stops a Cardassian supply ship. Maxwell tells Picard that the proof is in the ship, but Picard refuses to board the ship, and he arrests Maxwell, and both ships return to Federation space. Now, as Gul Macet leaves the Enterprise, Picard tells him that Maxwell was correct. Picard's job, however, was to guard the peace. But in the future, he tells Gul Macet that the Federation will be watching Cardassian activities more closely. And that is the end of the episode. Now, this was kind of a Heart of Darkness type story. If you've never read the story of the Heart of Darkness, they adapted this into a movie called Apocalypse Now, which came out back in 1979. And the basic premise was they were trying to figure out what happened to a defective colonel, and he somehow isolated himself and apparently went mad. And as far as this episode goes, that's what they're trying to figure out about Ben Maxwell. He was considered to be one of Starfleet's finest captains, and all of a sudden he's going off killing Cardassians for, at the beginning, no apparent reason. They're wondering what happened to him. And they introduce Miles O'Brien, who actually served with Ben Maxwell earlier before he joined the Enterprise. So this is the first time we really get to see Chief O'Brien as one of the primary characters in an episode. We've seen him several times before. In fact, we saw him in the last episode as he got married. But this one, he's really central to the very front of the story, and he really plays a primary part in solving this dilemma because he is able to transport over to the Phoenix and able to talk Ben Maxwell into finally surrendering here. And they do have a nice moment at the very end where they sing a song called The Minstrel Boy. And it's basically a song that they identify together. They both have an Irish heritage, and they reminisce a little bit about their old days on the Rutledge where they served together. And basically at the end, Maxwell says, "I'm not going to get out of this one, am I?" And O'Brien says, "No, you're not." And it also deals with a lot of things that Miles O'Brien is working on. For instance, his new marriage. He and Keiko have a scene together where they are trying each other's foods from their heritage, and O'Brien is trying as best he can to enjoy Keiko's, and he says, I'd like to do some of the same, and that's kind of a cute moment there, too, where he's trying to be respectful, but obviously doesn't like the cooking that she has there, too. You also get to see the inner turmoil that O'Brien had in his history with the Cardassians. And in this picture, he talks to one of the Cardassians and says that it's not that he has prejudice against the Cardassians, it's the fact that he used to be so concerned about killing anything, and through the war with the Cardassians, he actually killed a Cardassian, and it was the first time that had happened, and he hates what he became because of that. And O'Brien was actually known as the hero of one of the battles of Setlik III, and repaired a transporter for the first time while rescuing several of his shipmates, which we learn later in Star Trek Deep Space Nine. And of course, an important element of this is the fact that we have a new alien race that is introduced, the Cardassians, whom we have not seen up until this point. TNG did introduce some new aliens while going through its run. We saw Q, of course, who repeats many times throughout the series. We see the Ferengi, the Borg were a huge one, and the Cardassians here. And they're not a species that is so foreign that you can't talk to them. They actually have some intelligent things to say, as we get to see with the captain of the ship. But they're definitely a dark and mischievous people, too. And this is the first time we see Mark Alimo in a role as a Cardassian. In this one, he is Gul Macet. But, of course, we see him much more on Star Trek Deep Space Nine as he later becomes Gul Dukat. And, in my opinion, is one of my favorite villains and characters on Deep Space Nine. So that's an important part. We definitely get to see some prejudice in the show with Captain Ben Maxwell assuming that the Cardassians are up to something just because they are Cardassians, and he's been at war with, the Federation has been at war with them so long, and by the 24th century they're trying to say that most people are able to get over this once this is ended, but a few people it's a little bit harder, and they do that because obviously in the 21st century we still have trouble being friends with people who we just went to war with. So we see O'Brien going through this conflict, and obviously Ben Maxwell as well. It's interesting how that theme also reoccurred in Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, which came out a little bit later in that year, and the Federation is just getting used to being at peace with the Klingons after having so much hostility. So that was a big theme during 1991. Now, Picard, of course, is doing everything he can to avoid another war with the Cardassians, and at the same time when this episode aired, the United States was going to war with Iraq and the Persian Gulf, so you see some of the parallels there. Of course, the United States was trying to make war based on Iraq invading Kuwait there, and some people argue that the U.S. was doing everything they could to start a war, whereas in this episode the opposite happens, that Picard is doing everything he can to avoid the war, although at the end he discovers that actually the Cardassians are up to something. They were doing what Ben Maxwell was suspecting. So one questions, well, was Maxwell doing the right thing because he actually was correct? Well, the problem was that Maxwell did not have the proof, and he went out on his own and was not obeying Federation orders. And he definitely had a lot of prejudice in his motives as well. So a very good episode, and I think one of the highlights of the 4th season. Comment below on your thoughts, and I will talk to you guys next time.